some lessons don't come from books. They come from bruises. They come from life.
There is no substitute for experience, period.
Some of the biggest successes were a byproduct of failure.
If you want to learn, build, and grow,
Why not learn from somebody who's already paid the price for success?
the wisdom is in the gray.
This is The Greybeard Show.
Greybeard Show. Learn,
Build.
grow.
Let me ask you something before we do anything else today. And I want you to genuinely sit with this, not just let it wash over you the way radio sometimes does when you're driving or doing something else. What is the worst thing that has ever happened to you? Take a moment. Let it actually surface. What's that worst thing that's happened to you? Don't reach for the polished version. Don't go to the thing that you've already made peace with and turned into a good story at dinner parties. Go to the real one. The one that still has some weight when it comes up. Maybe it's a business that collapsed and took years of your life down with it. Maybe it's a marriage that ended and you still aren't entirely sure how you got from where you started to where that finished. Maybe it's a financial season so dark that you were genuinely afraid. Not anxious, not stressed, actually afraid about how you were going to take care of the people depending on you. Maybe it's something nobody knows about, something you've carried quietly for a long time because the shame around it felt heavier than the thing itself. You got it? You with me? Here's the question I want to spend the next 54 minutes on. What if that thing, the worst thing, didn't happen to you at all? What if it happened for you? Now I know how that lands. I know some of you just flinched, and I want to say clearly, I'm not dismissing the pain. I'm not doing the thing where I slap a motivational bumper sticker over a real wound and call it healing. I've had enough people do that to me in my worst seasons that I have zero interest in doing that to you. What I'm inviting you into today is something that took me years to understand and even longer to actually live with. The idea that the architecture of a meaningful life is almost never built in the comfortable chapters. It's built in the ones you barely survived. My name is Greybeard, and this is The Greybeard Show. Today's episode is called Mindset Magic. And I want to be precise about what I mean by that, because mindset has become one of those words that gets thrown around so casually, I feel like it's starting to lose its meaning. You hear it attached to everything. Mindset shifts, mindset hacks, mindset this, mindset that. And most of what gets packaged under that label is either surface level positive thinking dressed up in new vocabulary, or it's the kind of advice that sounds great in a motivational video at 2 p.m, but disappears completely the moment your life actually gets hard. This is not what we're doing today. What I mean by mindset and what I mean by magic is this. There is a set of cognitive frameworks, interpretive habits, and philosophical anchors that, when you genuinely build them into the way you process your life, will transform what your circumstances mean to you and therefore what they do to you, not because the circumstances change, because you do. You change. That's the magic. Transformation that looks impossible from the outside, but is completely explainable once you understand the process. The same way a diamond looks impossible until you understand what happens to coal under extreme pressure over a sustained period of time. And I want to start with the foundational idea that everything else today builds on, and that's this. Reality is neutral. Meaning is a choice. Let me say that again. Reality is neutral, meaning is a choice. The event, whatever yours is a fact. It is a set of things that happened in sequence in the real world. The business closed, the relationship ended, the money ran out, the diagnosis came back, the partner walked. Those are all facts. But the story you build around those facts, what they mean about you, what they mean about your future, what they say about whether you deserve good things or whether the universe is fundamentally hostile toward you, That story is not a fact. That story is a choice. It may not feel like a choice, especially when the wound is fresh, but it is. And this distinction between the fact of an event and the meaning you assign to it is the hairline fracture in the wall between being stuck and being free. It is the difference between two people going through identical circumstances and one of them being destroyed by them while the other is launched into something new and awesome. I've watched this play out in my own life and in the lives of people I've coached. Two entrepreneurs go through bankruptcy. One of them carries it as a permanent identity. I'm the guy who failed. I couldn't make it work. I'm not cut out for this. And he makes every subsequent decision from inside that story. He plays small. He doesn't trust himself. He stays safe and therefore stays stuck. The other one sits in the wreckage for a while. And I want to be clear, the sitting in it is not optional. We all get to that. But eventually he picks up a different lens. He asks a different question. Not why did this happen to me, but what is this teaching me? And what does it make possible that wasn't possible before? Same event, completely different reactions to it. The difference is not intelligence. It's not talent. It's not even work ethic. It is the operating system running in the background of your mind, the interpretive framework that processes experience and generates meaning. And here's the most important thing I can tell you in this first segment. That operating system can be updated. It is not fixed. It is not genetic. It is not the permanent product of your upbringing or your trauma or your worst seasons. It can be rewritten. It can be rebuilt, and it can be upgraded. Not overnight. Not with a single podcast by me or a single radio show, but deliberately, consistently with the right tools applied over time. That is what today is about. That's what this show is going to be about, giving you those tools. Now, I want to introduce something before we go to break because I think it frames the entire conversation, and I want it sitting in your mind while we work through everything else. There are two questions you can ask when something hard happens to you. These are not equally useful questions. They are not interchangeable. They lead to completely different places. The first question is, why is this happening to me? This is the default question. It's the one the brain reaches for automatically because the brain is wired for threat detection. When something goes wrong, the threat detection system activates. It scans for cause. It wants to assign blame, whether that blame lands on you, on someone else, on the market, on God, on the universe. It wants a reason. And most of the time, the reason it lands on has a self-defeating quality to it because the brain in threat mode is not looking for empowering explanations. It's looking for protective ones. And protection in the emotional wiring of a human being often looks like shrinking, staying in, trusting less, risking nothing. Why is this happening to me? Is a question with no productive answer. You can chase it for years. You can pay therapists to help you chase it. And there may be value in some of that exploration. But as a daily operating question, as the primary lens through which you process adversity, it will keep you exactly where you are. It will keep you stuck. But here's the second question. The second question is far more beneficial, far more powerful. What is this happening for? Same event, different question, different inquiry. And the results are not even in the same conversation. This question assumes, it requires you to assume that there is a purpose embedded in the difficulty, that the hard thing is not random noise, but signal, that something useful, something necessary, something that could have arrived no other way is present inside the experience that you're experiencing. When you ask that question, what is this happening for? Your brain does something different. It scans for opportunity. It looks for the lesson. It opens to the possibility that the thing you're going through is not an interruption to your story, but maybe an essential chapter of it. And here's what I've found. After everything I've been through personally and after years of sitting across from people in the middle of their worst seasons, the answer to that second question is almost always there. It's not always immediate. It's not always comfortable. Sometimes it takes months. Sometimes it can take years, but the purpose is almost always there. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, so stay with me. If this is landing, if you like the idea of this type of conversation and mentorship, I would encourage you to reach out. My name is Greybeard. You can get in touch with me by texting Greybeard, Greybeard, to 84503 on your smartphone. Go to your texting app. Key in my name, Greybeard, to 84503. Just send that as a text. Key that 84503 number in like it's the cell number for a new friend you just made. And then you're going to text Greybeard, my name, and I'll be in touch. Greybeard to 84503. All right, getting back into the conversation here, mindset magic. We're in the middle of something real. A conversation about how you control, how you view things that happen to you, about the practical tools that actually shift how you move through adversity. So before the break, I laid down the foundation. Reality is neutral. What you extract from your reality, meaning that's a choice, and introduce you to the two questions. Why is this happening to me, which is a victim question, versus what is this happening for, which is an opportunity, seeing the light, seeing the goodness out of the adversity. Now I want to get into the tools, concrete, practical, use them this week tools for you. And I want to start with the story because I think the story is what makes the tools real. When my business collapsed, I mean genuinely collapsed, not a rough quarter, not a difficult year, but the kind of structural failure when you're looking at bankruptcy and trying to figure out how to explain to your wife and your sons what the next chapter looks like, my first response was probably similar to the one you would have. It was rage. Not sadness, not fear, at least not initially. Rage. The hot, humiliating, disorienting kind that comes when you've worked as hard as you know how to work, made what felt like the right decisions, believed in what you were building, and it all still came apart. I was furious at the circumstances. I was furious at the people I felt had contributed to the failure. I was candidly furious at God. I had prayed over and over for that business. I had tithed from it. I had tried to run it with integrity, and it fell apart anyway. And in that rage, I made decisions, fast decisions, reactive decisions, decisions driven entirely by the emotional weather I was inside of, the weather, the emotional weather in me. Some of those decisions cost me years, not because the emotions were wrong. I had every right to feel what I was feeling, but because I let the storm drive my life. I let those emotions dictate my responses. I let pain author the next chapter before I had any perspective on what the next chapter actually looked like or meant. And I'm going to come back to that. But first, I want to talk about a concept I call divine rerouting, because I think it's the most accessible entry point to this whole conversation. And it's something that almost everyone listening has experienced, whether or not they had a name for it. Let me remind you, you know the flat tire story, right? You've either lived a version of it or you know someone who has. You're running late. You're frustrated. The day is already not going the way you planned, and then something delays you. A flat tire, a dead battery, a phone call that runs long, a flight you miss by 10 minutes, and you're furious. And then later, sometimes hours later, sometimes days later, you find out that where you would have been at the time you would have been there, something happened. An accident. A situation you would have walked directly into, a meeting that would have set something terrible in motion. The delay wasn't bad luck. The delay was protecting you. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not saying every inconvenience is secretly saving your life. Sometimes a flat tire is just a flat tire. I'm not trying to build a theology of inconveniences. What I'm saying is this: your plan is constructed from what you can see. Your routing is based on the information available to you in the moment. And there is frequently a bigger picture operating that you do not have access to. Sometimes the universe, God, if that's your language and it's mine, has better routing logic than anything you could have mapped out yourself. And the interruption to your plan is not always the enemy of your plan. Sometimes the detour is the destination. Sometimes what looks like a roadblock is a reroute towards something you couldn't have navigated to directly on your own. See, I spent years being furious at closed doors. It took me a long time, too long, honestly, to start asking what was on the other side of those doors I didn't know about. To consider the possibility that some of those doors were closed on my behalf rather than against me. Let me take that into the faith space for a minute, because I think this is where the concept of unanswered prayers becomes one of the most powerful reframes available to anyone who has a relationship with God or is even open to one. I have prayed for things I did not get. Maybe you have too. Deals I wanted. Relationships I wanted to save. Situations I was desperately trying to hold together. And at the time, the silence or the no felt like abandonment from God. It felt like either God wasn't listening or I wasn't worth listening to. And there was something fundamentally broken in my faith. Years later, I have a completely different view. There was a partnership I was trying to build in my financial advising days. I prayed hard for it, worked hard for it, made concessions I probably shouldn't have made because I wanted it so badly. It fell through in a way that was humiliating and financially damaging in the short term. 2 years later, the people I had been trying to partner with were under investigation. The structure I had been trying to build with them would have put my name, my license, and potentially my freedom directly in the line of fire. The prayer that went unanswered didn't mean I wasn't heard. It meant he had a better answer than the one I was looking for. The closed door wasn't rejection. It was protection operating at a level I couldn't see from where I was standing. There is a line in Proverbs that I've lived. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. I used to read that verse as comfort when things went well. Plans working out. That must be the Lord's purpose. Now I read it with a much wider lens. Sometimes the Lord's purpose prevailing looks like my plan succeeding. And sometimes it looks like my plan being dismantled so that something better can be built in its place. The unanswered prayer is not always silence. Sometimes it's the most articulate, most loving, most protective thing that could possibly happen for you. You can't just read it that way from the inside the moment of wanting. Now, here's the practical tool that comes out of all of this. I call it the delay of interpretation, and it's one of the most powerful and most underused disciplines in the human toolkit. When something bad happens, a loss, a failure, a betrayal, a door closing, the brain immediately wants to assign meaning to it. That is the brain doing its job. It is trying to make sense of a disruption. The problem is the meaning the brain generates in the first hours and days after a hard event is almost always distorted. It is generated under conditions of high emotional activation, fear, anger, grief, humiliation. And those conditions are not conditions of clear perception. They are conditions of survival processing. The brain in that state is not trying to help you understand what happened. It is trying to protect you from future pain, and the stories it tells to accomplish that protection are often deeply limiting ones. You are not enough. This always happens to you. Good things don't last. You should never have trusted that person. You should never have taken that risk. You should stay small, stay safe. Those are not truths. Those are threat responses wearing the costume of insight. The discipline is to wait before you decide what a thing means. Not forever, not indefinitely. You cannot live in interpretive limbo, but the minimum viable gap between a hard event and a firm interpretation of the event is 24 hours. The ideal gap for major life events is much longer, weeks, months, sometimes years. The meaning you assign to an event in the first hour will almost never hold up to the meaning you would assign to it looking back from 5 years of distance. This is not passive. This is not avoidance. You are not ignoring what happened. You are simply refusing to let pain author your story before you had a chance to read what actually happened. And here's how to do it in practical terms. When something goes wrong in your life, and I mean genuinely wrong, not just inconvenient, but when something does go wrong in your life, I want you to do one thing immediately. Say these words out loud, or at minimum, say them to yourself. I don't know what this means yet. That's it. That's the practice. 5 words that buy you the most important thing you need in that moment: time. Because time is the enemy of distorted interpretation. The longer you can hold that question open, what is this happening for, before you lock in an answer, the more accurate and the more useful that answer is going to be for you. Now, I've got a lot more tools to unpack after this brief break, but I'm going to have a call to action there. If this is landing for you, if you like the idea of these types of conversations, if you like the idea of accountability and working with a mentor, you can reach out. Okay, you can text me. Here's what you would do. Go to your smartphone, open up your texting app, go to it, and key in the following 5-digit number, as though it's like my cell phone. It's not my cell phone, but it's the way that you can communicate with me. It's 84503. So imagine that's my cell number and you want to text me. And what you're going to do is you're going to text my name, Greybeard. That lets me know you're out there in Radio Land. Greybeard, all one word, Greybeard, as though that's my given name, Greybeard, to 84503. If you'd like to work with a guy that's made more mistakes on his way to successes than he'd like to share. You know, all of my gray hairs are wisdom learned from failures or setbacks that I've experienced. And so if you'd like to reach out, I'd love to explore potentially working with you. So text Greybeard to 84503 on your smartphone. All right. We're in the part of today's conversation that I think has the most direct, immediate, use it today kind of application. We've been talking about mindset magic, the framework and tools that shift how you process adversity and difficulty. What we've done is we've covered the foundational idea that meaning, what kind of meaning you assign to an event, a negative event that happens to you. Meaning is a choice, and we've talked about divine rerouting and unanswered prayers, and we've introduced the discipline of delayed interpretation. Don't try to figure out exactly what it means in the moment. Sit with it, give it time, search for meaning with time. Now I want to go somewhere that I think trips up more people than almost anything else in the personal development space. And this is the question of emotions, what to do with them, how to work with them, and how to stop letting them run your life in ways you don't choose. So when people hear the phrase, take your emotions out of the equation, there's a very common misunderstanding about what that means. Most people hear that as suppress them, go numb, build a wall around yourself, stop caring so much, grow a thicker skin. Know what I mean? Is that the way you see it? Take your emotions out of the equation. It means you want to truncate them. You want to cut them off. You want to shut them down. That's my interpretation of that. So I want to be very direct with you. This is not what I'm saying. And I'm not the only one. Okay. And not only is it not what I'm saying, it is actively counterproductive advice that I have watched damage people for years. Whatever you push down has a way of coming back up. Sideways, usually, at the worst possible time, aimed at the wrong people, with the interest accrued on top of it. The person who has built a wall around their emotions in the name of being tough or being professional or being in control is not a person who has solved the emotion problem. They are a person sitting on top of a pressure cooker with no release valve who has simply not yet had the event that blows the lid off. That is not strength. That is deferred fragility. Here's the distinction I want you to hold. Emotions are data. They are not decisions. Let me say that again because I want it to land cleanly. Your emotions are just simply data. They're telling you something. They are not decisions. Your anger is telling you something. It is telling you that a boundary has been violated, or that an expectation has been betrayed, or that something you value has been threatened. This is useful information. That is your internal alarm system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Your fear is telling you something. It is telling you that you perceive a threat, real or imagined, and that your nervous system is mobilizing resources to deal with it. That is also useful information, provided you can distinguish between a real threat and a perceived one, which is a skill we'll come back to. Your grief is telling you something. It is telling you that something mattered to you, that you loved it, that its loss is real and significant and deserves to be honored. Grief is not weakness. Grief is the price of having cared about something, and it is worth paying. The mistake is not feeling any of those things, any of those emotions. The mistake is letting them drive your life. So here's the metaphor I've landed on after years of trying to explain this to people, and it's the one that seems to stick. Your emotions are like weather, real, powerful, and completely temporary. You don't cancel your entire life because it's storming outside. You don't construct your house based on this morning's weather report. You don't look at a thunderstorm and conclude that the sun no longer exists and that warmth is permanently gone from the world. Weather is real. It is happening. It's affecting you. It requires some adjustment on your part, but it passes. You live in a climate, not a forecast. Your emotional states operate the same way. They are real. They are happening. They are affecting you. Some adjustments are required, but they are not permanent. They are not the final truth about your situation. And making permanent, life-altering decisions at the peak of an emotional storm is one of the most reliable ways to create the next crisis in your life you'll have to work through. So here's tool number 3, and this one is the one I come back to more than any other in my own life. Feel everything. Decide from your values, not from your wounds, not from your fear, not from your rage or your grief or your humiliation. Make decisions from your values. And what do I mean by values? I mean the principles that define who you are when you're operating at your best. Integrity, faith, commitment to your family, the belief that you are capable of rebuilding, the conviction that your word means something, the understanding that how you respond to adversity is the most important thing about you. Those things don't change with the weather. They are the climate. And when you make decisions from that place, even in the middle of a storm, the decisions hold up. They are ones you can look back on and respect, regardless of how the outcome unfolded. In the middle of my bankruptcy, back in 2009, there were moments where I wanted to do things that I would not be proud of. I wanted to make calls I shouldn't have made. I wanted to burn relationships out of anger. I wanted to walk away from obligations because the situation felt unfair and I was exhausted and I genuinely did not have the energy to do the right thing. The moments where I acted from the wound, where the weather drove my life, where emotions dictated my responses, I created new problems on top of the existing ones. The moments where I paused long enough to ask myself who I actually wanted to be in this situation, and then acted from that place. Those moments are the ones I can point to as the foundation of what eventually got rebuilt. That's how I rebuilt my life. Emotion is the passenger. Character's the driver. This is not a bumper sticker. This is a structural truth about how sustainable human beings operate. Now, I want to give you a tool number 4, and this one is practical in a way that you can sit down with as early as tonight if something is pressing on you right now as you hear my voice out in Radio Land. I call it the post-game film framework. Here's the idea. When a great coach wants to improve the performance of their team, they don't just run more drills and hope things get better. They sit down with the film from the last game and they study it. Not to beat anyone up, not to assign blame, not to replay the worst moments until everyone feels terrible about themselves. They study it to extract intelligence. What worked? What didn't? What decisions were made under pressure? And were they the right ones? What did the defense expose that we need to address? What was within our control and what wasn't? The film, it doesn't lie. It shows you exactly what happened without the distortion of emotion or ego or the fog of being inside the game. And the coaches who are best at using it, the ones who build winning programs over time, are the ones who have learned to watch it with curiosity instead of judgment, with the mindset of a scientist instead of a critic. And I want you to apply this framework to your setbacks. You could be experiencing one right now. Here's how you would use this. Here's the protocol. Give yourself a minimum of 48 hours after something significant goes wrong. You need at least that much time for the initial emotional weather to start clearing. Then sit down, physically sit down somewhere quiet with something to write, and work through these 5 questions. Question 1. What actually happened? Not the story, the facts. As close to the film version as you can get. What were the actual events? What took place in sequence as a neutral observer? How would you describe them? Act as though you're a TV reporter, just reporting this fact. This thing happened. What happened? Question 2. What was in my control? Not what should have been different, not what you wish you'd done, what was genuinely within your power to affect. So during that decision, whatever that event is, whatever that thing happened, what actually happened, the next question, what was in my control? What could you control about that event? Question 3, what was outside of my control? What were the factors that were operating regardless of what you did? Market conditions, other people's choices, timing, circumstances you could not have anticipated or changed. Question 4, what would I do differently knowing what I know now? This is awesome. This is the learning extraction question. It's not about punishing yourself for what you didn't know at the time. It's about building future capacity. It's about learning and wisdom from your present understanding. If you don't ask that question, what would I do differently, knowing what I know now? That is the best question for life change. And lastly, question 5. This one is the one that goes the deepest. What did this reveal that I needed to see? What was the extraction? What was the goodness? Every significant setback reveals something about you or your life. A weakness in a business model you were too comfortable to examine honestly. A crack in a relationship you were too busy to address. A red flag you should have seen but didn't because you were blinded by just wanting to see that it wasn't there. An assumption about yourself or about another person that needed to be stress tested. A pattern you've been running that was never going to produce the result you wanted. Hard things have a way of illuminating these things that easy things simply cannot. You don't discover the structural weaknesses in a building by looking at it on a sunny day. You discover them when it gets hit by something big, when it's rattled, when something happens. The setback is the teacher. The post-game film is where the learning lives, and the people who go looking for the lesson, not to feel better in a moment, not to bypass the grief, but as a genuine commitment to extracting everything useful from what happened. Those are the people who compound wisdom over time. They do not just survive hard seasons, they graduate from them. And let me give you one more thing before the break, because I think it's important and it builds directly into what we're going to cover in the next segment. There's a concept in cognitive psychology called post-traumatic growth. And I want to talk about it for a moment because I think most people have heard of post-traumatic stress, which is real and serious and deserves all the attention it gets. But far fewer people know that the research shows something equally significant on the other side of trauma. Post-traumatic growth is the documented phenomenon where a significant percentage of people who go through something genuinely difficult, painful, traumatic experiences report not just surviving them, but actually growing through them, reporting higher levels of personal strength, deeper relationships, a greater sense of meaning and purpose in their life, and a richer appreciation for life than they had before the event occurred. The research consistently puts that number somewhere around 70%. Roughly 7 in 10 people who go through something genuinely hard, something life-changing, something significant, report meaningful positive growth on the other side of it. That is not an accident. That is not blind optimism. That is a documented feature of how human beings are built when the right frameworks are in place and the right questions are being asked. You are wired for this, not just to survive what's hard, but to grow through it. And if this is landing for you, if you like the idea of this type of coaching and mentoring, reach out, get in touch. I'd love to potentially work with you. You can do so by texting Greybeard to 84503. If you take out your smartphone, go to your texting app, key in that 84503 number, and then just text my name, Greybeard, Greybeard, all one word, Greybeard as one word, as though it's my name, to 84503. That lets me know out in Radio Land that you're out there, that you are curious, that you'd like to explore this in more detail, and that I should give you a call. So text Greybeard to 84503. So we've been doing some heavy lifting today, real practical, gritty work on how to process adversity and difficulty in ways that build you up rather than diminish you. And I want to open up the aperture a little on this segment because I think there's a bigger frame available, one that I believe gives all of the tools we've been discussing their ultimate grounding. And I don't want to get to the end of this show without spending some real time in it. I want to talk about what I call narrative authorship. And I want to start with a question that sounds simple, but has a real answer, and that answer matters. Are you a character in your story, or are you the author of your story? Here's what I mean. A character in a story, a character is acted upon. Things happen to them. They react, they survive. They suffer. They wait for the plot to shift. The story is something that unfolds around them and largely through them, and their primary relationship to events is one of response and endurance. They don't choose the circumstances. They don't choose what the chapters mean. They are, in the most fundamental sense, passengers in their own narrative. An author operates differently. An author uses what they're given. An author decides what a chapter means, how it's going to be used, what the arc of the larger story is, and where the thing is ultimately heading. An author doesn't have control over every plot development. That would not be very interesting as a story, but they have absolute authority over the narrative interpretation, over the meaning, over the hard thing, what it becomes. Most people, and I want to be careful here not to say this as criticism because I lived as a character in my own story for years, most people are operating as characters in their life story. Not because they choose to, because nobody ever sat them down and showed them that they could pick up the pen. And I want to be clear about what authorship is not. It is not pretending bad things aren't bad. I have no patience for that brand of positivity that insists you should be grateful for everything immediately and never admit that something genuinely hurt you. That is not wisdom. That is spiritual bypassing, and it doesn't hold up under real pressure. Authorship is not managing your feelings into submission. It's not about performing resilience before you've actually found it. What authorship means, what it actually means in practice is this. You refuse to let the hard thing be the final word. You feel it. You process it. You sit in it as long as it takes to actually move through it rather than around it. And then you make a decision, a deliberate, conscious decision about what this becomes, what you do with it, what it means for the next chapter of your life. Let me tell you something about the tax burden I carried for years. And when I say tax burden, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about a difficult tax year. I'm talking about a crushing, suffocating financial obligation that sat on my chest like a stone for a sustained period of time. The kind of thing where you wake up in the morning and it's the first thought, and you go to sleep and it's the last thought. The kind of thing where you have to make decisions about which obligations you can meet and which ones you have to let slide, and neither choice feels okay, and you carry the weight of both simultaneously. For a long time, I was a character in that story. It was happening to me. I was being crushed by it. My identity was wrapped up in it. The guy with the problem, the guy who made the mistake that led there, the guy who should have known better. The story I was telling myself was a dark one, and it was self-reinforcing, and it was stealing years from me. The shift happened. And it wasn't overnight. I want to be honest about the timeline. The shift happened when I started asking different questions. Not how do I get out of this as the primary question, but what is being built in me while I'm in this? What capacity for empathy was being developed in me toward other people carrying financial burdens? What understanding of humanity and humility was being forged that I could not have obtained any other way? What was I learning about who actually showed up when things were hard versus who disappeared in my life? What was I discovering about my own character? The parts that held and the parts that bent under pressure that I needed to see clearly if I was ever going to become someone worth following. Those questions didn't dissolve the problem. The problem was still real. The obligation was still there. I still owed a lot of money in taxes, but the experience of it changed. I went from being buried by it to being forged by it, to being curious about it, to learning what I could extract in terms of goodness out of it. And there's no small distinction here. The distinction is everything. Now I want to spend some time on the compression concept because I think it's the metaphor that carries this whole segment. Coal becomes a diamond under extreme pressure over a sustained period of time in conditions that from the outside look like nothing but darkness and weight. There is no shortcut. There is no process that produces diamonds in comfort. The pressure is not incidental to the diamond. The pressure is what makes the diamond possible. Now, I have said this to people in the middle of genuinely terrible seasons and had them look at me like I was being dismissive. And I understand that reaction. When you're in the compression, the last thing you want to hear is that the compression is the point or that it's good for you somehow. It does not feel like formation. It feels like destruction. But here's what I want you to hold. What you are building inside a hard season is invisible when you're building it. The diamond does not look like a diamond while the pressure is being applied. It looks like a rock. It looks like rubble. It looks like nothing that should cost what it's costing. The value becomes visible later when the pressure lifts, when the distance gives you perspective. When you look back at who you were before the hard season and who you are now, and you can see the absolute clarity that the version of you standing in the aftermath is stronger, deeper, more capable, more trustworthy, more genuinely useful to the world than the version of you that went into that season. You cannot manufacture that. You cannot produce it in a seminar or a self-help book or a morning routine. As valuable as all those things can be, that version of you, that ability, it's forged in fire. It is produced in the pressure of life. The question is not whether you're going to go through hard things. You are. Everybody does. The question is whether you go through them as a character being acted upon or as an author extracting everything the experience has to teach you. I want to say something now that I think about a lot when I'm talking to people who feel like they're behind. People who look at where they are in life compared to where they thought they'd be or where they think they should be or where the people around them appear to be, and they feel the quiet grinding anxiety of being behind schedule. You are not behind. I want to say that directly because I think it's one of the most corrosive lies available to a human being in this culture at this moment. The comparison economy we live in, the constant ambient awareness of where everyone else seems to be in their journey is producing a generation of people who are spending enormous emotional energy on a race that doesn't actually exist. Moses was 80 years old when he stepped into his most significant assignment of his life. Not 40, not 50, 80. He had 40 years of preparation, 40 years in the desert that probably looked from the outside and possibly from the inside like wandering, like nothing, like being behind. It was not wandering. It was formation. Every one of those years was building something that the assignment for him required. Abraham held the promise for 100 years before it came through. 100 years of believing in something that he could not yet see in the face of every natural and logical argument against it. That is not a man who is behind. That is a man being built to the exact specifications required by what was coming for him. Colonel Sanders was 62 years old when Kentucky Fried Chicken became what it became. Before that, he had multiple failed businesses, a failed marriage, and a social security check that he famously used to fund the early stages of what eventually became a global franchise. From the outside, for most of his life, he looked like a man who couldn't get it together. He was not behind. He was in preparation. Your timeline is not broken. It is not behind. It is simply different from the one you drew for yourself. And different is not the same thing as wrong. The detours are not wasted miles. The closed doors are not evidence of your inadequacy. The years that look like nothing may be the years that built everything for you. And here's the faith anchor I want to leave you with in this segment. And I want to give it the weight it deserves. There is a design to your life that you cannot fully see from the inside. I believe that with everything I am. Not because it has always felt like it, not because every season has made sense in real time, but because I've had enough distance now on enough painful chapters in my life to see what was being built in them. And that craftsmanship is undeniable. The wound that qualified me to help other people, the failure that taught me the thing I needed to know to exceed at the next level, the loss that cleared out space for something I couldn't have received while I was holding on to what lost. None of it was an accident. None of it was wasted. Not yours either. All of it is stuff you can extract goodness from. And if that lands, if that makes sense to you, reach out. Would love to work with you. I'm a mentor. I'm a coach. I love helping business owners. I love helping people become better versions of yourself. I believe my purpose right now, hearing my voice, is to uplift, inspire, and encourage people into meaningful and lasting positive life change. If that sounds like something you might be interested in, text Greybeard, Greybeard. Text Greybeard to 84503 on your smartphone. Go to your texting app, key in that 84503 number, and then just text my name, Greybeard, Greybeard, to 84503. Let me tell you something about where I sit today versus where I was at some of the lowest points in my story, because I think the distance between those two places is relevant to what I want to close with, and I think it might be relevant to where some of you are right now. There were years, genuine years, not just a rough season or a difficult quarter, years where I did not know how the story was going to turn out. And I don't mean that in a vague general sense. I mean there were specific nights where the gap between where I was and where I needed to be felt insurmountable, where I had done the math and the math didn't work, where I had prayed and the prayer felt like I was landing in an empty room, right? Where I had given everything I had to give and it still wasn't enough. And I was running out of ideas of where to find more. If you're in that place right now, as you hear my voice out in Radio Land, if you're in that place right now or anywhere close to it, I want you to hear this directly from someone who has been there and come out the other side. The story's not over. The story is not over. It does not feel that way from inside it. I know. From inside it, the middle always looks like the end. The darkness of a hard chapter always has a quality of permanence to it that is completely at odds with how temporary it actually is. But the feeling of permanence is a liar. It is the most convincing liar in the world, and I've been fooled by it multiple times. You probably have been too. The story is not over, and the chapters you're in the middle of right now, the painful, the confusing, the expensive, the humiliating ones, those are not chapters that define you. The chapters that define you are the ones that come after, the ones where you took what you went through and you built something worth having with it. You extracted the goodness from the failure, the lessons from the challenge. This is what we've been working toward all day. So let me bring everything together because I want you to leave this hour with something you can actually use. Not inspiration that evaporates by the time you hit the next stoplight, but tools, a framework, something you can come back to. Here's the full stack, the mindset magic framework in plain terms. The foundation is this: reality is neutral. What you assign as meaning is a choice. Every event in your life, every setback, every failure, every loss is a fact. What that fact means is entirely yours to determine. This is not a small thing. It's the entire game. The people who thrive after devastation and the people who are consumed by it are not separated by the severity of what happened to them. They are separated by the meaning they chose to assign to it. So tool 1, ask the right question. Stop asking why this is happening to you. Start asking what it is happening for. Start asking what it is making possible for you in your life. Start asking what is being built in you right now that could not have been built any other way. The question does not make the pain disappear, but it redirects your brain's processing power from threat detection mode into opportunity detection mode. And over time, that redirection changes everything. Tool 2. Delay your interpretation of the event. When something hard happens or bad happens, your brain will immediately try to generate a story about what it means. The story will almost always be distorted because it's being generated under high emotional activation, which is not a condition of clear perception. The discipline is to say out loud, if you can, I don't know what this means yet. And I mean it, just that. I don't know what this means yet. Give the interpretation time. Give the weather, that emotion's in you. Give the weather time to move through you before you start building permanent structures based on the forecast. Tool 3, feel everything. Decide from your values. Your emotions are data. They are not decisions. They are the passenger. Honor them. Honor your emotions. Listen to what they're telling you about this. Let them inform you. But keep your values in the driver's seat when it comes to decisions. When the storm is at its worst is precisely the moment your principles matter most, because those decisions, the ones made at the peak of the hardest moments, are the ones that either build you or erode the foundation of who you're becoming. Tool 4. Run the post-game film. After every significant setback, give yourself 48 hours, then sit down with it like a coach rather than a critic. Work through the 5 questions. What actually happened? What was in my control? What was outside my control? What would I do differently moving forward? And most importantly, what did this reveal that I needed to see? The setback is the teacher. Go to school on it. Tool number 5, and this one is less of a tool and more of a commitment. Choose to be the author of your story rather than a character in it. Refuse to let the hard thing be the final word. Feel it, process it, honor what it costs, and then pick up the pen and write what comes next. I want to close with something I say to myself and have said to a lot of people I've mentored over the years, and I want to say it directly to you. Wherever you are, whatever you're carrying, whatever chapter you're in the middle of right now, you have not been disqualified. You have been in preparation. The closed doors were not rejection. They were redirection towards something your current self wasn't yet equipped to handle. The unanswered prayers were not silence. They were protection, operating at a level you couldn't see from where you were standing. The flat tire was not bad luck. It was the reroute you didn't know you needed. And the worst thing that ever happened to you, the thing you went in to the very first moment of today's show, when I asked you to find it, it may be the most important thing that has ever happened to you. You may not be able to see that yet. That's okay. The distance will come. The perspective will come. And when it does, when you can finally see the design of the hard seasons from far enough away to see the whole picture, I think you're going to be astonished at the craftsmanship. I think you're going to look back at the chapters you're in right now, the ones that feel like the worst ones, and you are going to see with a clarity that is only available from the other side that they were not the chapters that broke you. They were the chapters that built you. That is mindset magic. And if this is something that you like, that hit home for you, that landed, that you'd like to talk with me, I've made more mistakes in my life than I would rather not share, but made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot of lessons from those, and part of that is what you're hearing today. If I had not made my mistakes, I could not share what I've shared to you. So if you'd like to explore mentorship, I'm a mentor, I'm a coach. I love helping business owners and hard-charging people at life. I feel like my purpose is to uplift, inspire, and encourage people into meaningful and lasting positive life change. And if that sounds like something you'd like to explore, then text Greybeard, Greybeard, Greybeard to 84503 on your smartphone. All you do is go to your texting app, go to that app where you key in a phone number from a new friend, key in 84503, and then just text my name, Greybeard, Greybeard. I'm the EY version of Gray, not the AY. So text Greybeard to 84503. And rest assured, my friends, I'm going to be back here same time, same place next week to talk more mentorship and coaching. Greybeard out. The Greybeard Show.
Greybeard Show. Learn.
Build.
Grow.